Welcome to GeoIntel. My name is Cody Jordan. Should have a pretty big show tonight. I'm going to be discussing all of the updates with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I haven't done a live stream in the last week, maybe even 2 weeks at this point. And so really I just have a lot of catching up to do in terms of everything that's happened between the Alaska summit, the proposed trilateral summit between Zelensky, Putin, and Trump. And I just had a light go out in here, so give me just a second. I gotta adjust my lighting real quick. Should be better. That light keeps going out and I have no idea why. And the lighting's all crazy anyways. My lips look like I got fucking lipstick on. They're like cherry red. Anyway. So yeah, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I haven't been around for the last 2 weeks, so I'm just going to go through, I'm going to do a bit of live commentary, sort of interjecting, giving my opinion, but mostly it's just going to be a rundown of everything that's happened since roughly the 14th, and I'll switch to the media window to just kind of allow you to read along with me, and I'll also be pulling up some map images, videos even, of the progression of the war, and to wrap it all up, I'll be really sort of discussing the end strategies. At the end of the day, it seems like what really has happened is everybody got played. Zelensky comes in. Well, really, Zelensky, he acts like he's open to the discussions. Then he ends up turning down a meeting in Moscow with Putin. It could have been on Trump's behalf because they weren't exactly clear as to whether or not Trump would have been invited to that. Although I can assume he was, because at the Alaska summit, Trump had mentioned the trilateral summit at the Alaska summit, and Putin said next time in Moscow. So I can only assume that he meant to have Trump there as well. That was something that was floated 2 days ago, I believe. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get right into it. There's a lot of money being thrown around, a lot of arms being traded, and as far as I can see at the moment, the war's not ending anytime soon. Russia has the advantage for now, and so we're going to get into our overview here. So this is the lead up to the Alaska summit. This isn't even, Trump and Putin have not even sat down at this point. August 14th, Russian forces captured their fourth town in the Dnieper region in the Pokrovsko direction. Pokrovsko direction. And then Russia's governor of Belgrade said, quote, "Tomorrow everything will end. We're talking about the, quote, special military operation, end quote, and we will begin a major demining work." Zelensky then said that Ukraine had obtained $1.5 billion worth of U.S. weapons funded by European allies. Ukrainian lines in the Kupiansk direction have also begun to collapse. This is August 14th. After Russian infantry units began storming northern Kupiansk city last night, the Ukrainian defense lines east of the Oskol River began to crumble. Russian forces captured an incredible 87 square kilometers of area. Multiple fortifications have fallen to Russian control. And then just to let you see what that looks like, at least from a map view, we have one here provided by Rerum Novarum, where this is actually the intel source that I got that from. On this map here, you can see Kupiansk, where my mouse is. It's this little highlighted area down here. This entire highlighted red region are the Russian forces that are pushing in from the northern region. This is all Ukrainian-controlled territory. This is all Russian-controlled territory. This, I am assuming, is some sort of DMZ, unless the map isn't 100% full. But this highlighted red region up here, this is where those Russian troops are pushing north, and they're going from the northern region, pushing down south into Kupiansk. Then, one of Ukraine's, and this is still August 14th, by the way, and there's a lot more to come here. So much shit has happened in the last week, you wouldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it, and it took me forever to put together this 6-page spiel of exactly what has happened. Still on August 14th, one of Ukraine's largest drone attacks now hits Russia. And you'll see here, we have another map. This one was provided by open source Intel. And this is Ukraine here. This is Russia here. All of those red arrows and blue arrows too. I'm not quite sure what those might be missiles instead of drones. The red, I believe, are all drones heading every which direction into Russian territory. By the way, I said this is Russia. This is Ukraine, but this is Russian-controlled Ukraine. Still on August 14th, the meeting hasn't even happened yet. Meeting is the next day. So President Trump then said that rare earth minerals could be a major focus of this meeting. Okay, now, as far as I'm concerned, as of right now, rare earth minerals are pretty much off the table. Putin had even offered Trump a rare earth mineral agreement. This would have been 2 to 3 months ago, where we were going to have some form of mining rights in Russia for the same rare earth minerals that we were sort of looking towards investing in before all of this broke out. And at the end of this, you'll see why I don't think that that's up for grabs whatsoever, at least not from America's perspective. So that concludes August 14th. August 15th is when the Trump-Putin meeting happened, and I think that it can be best summarized by sort of the asks, the gives, the proposals that Russia and Ukraine were offering up after this meeting. And judging by those asks and those gives, we'll understand, and non-starters, things that absolutely neither side will never agree to, why it looks like this war won't be going anywhere anytime soon. So, after the Trump-Putin meeting, Russia actually appeared to really want to end the war. They gave a pretty decisive list of what their demands and asks were, and overall, it's a mirror of the 2022 agreement that Ukraine had initially agreed to until Washington, and I believe this would have been whatever that fat fuck from, pardon my language, whatever that fat fuck from the UK kind of looked like Donald Trump. I'm forgetting his name. Give me just a second. See if I can find this guy. See if I can find it based off that. That's okay. Whatever. I believe he was prime minister at the time, had to step down due to all of Boris Johnson. There we go. That's the name I'm trying to think of. Yeah. I think he had to step down because of Brexit. Anyway. In 2022, Ukraine had agreed to a ceasefire deal, and that exact agreement, or at least I think it's roughly 90% of what that 2022 agreement was, is what is currently up for grabs now, in terms of what Russia's proposing. So, in terms of the non-starters for Russia, this is what Russia will not accept to happen if they are to go forward with some form of peace agreement. No ceasefire will be implemented until a comprehensive agreement is reached. So, in other words, until they've agreed on their terms, they're going to continue to fight. And you'll see plenty of evidence of that being the case after I get through this, because in the days after this negotiation meeting, they continue to fight their ass off. And at this rate, the Ukrainian front lines are collapsing by the day. But the second non-starter is that Ukraine cannot join NATO. And this is, of course, really what kicked off the war in the first place, was the West infiltrating these former Soviet bloc states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and turning them into NATO states. And Ukraine was next up on that list as they sort of went south along Russia's western border there with Europe. And the 2014 infiltration / CIA coup that happened in Ukraine was what was meant to push Ukraine more towards the West and hopefully inculcate them into the NATO system. Then Trump gets out of office end of 2020, 2021, or late 2020 is when Russia begins the invasion. And again, it's still really over NATO. It's over the West, the E5, E3 countries installing missile bases on Russia's borders. So anyway, I'm done with that little rant there. We'll keep going down with the demands. The Kremlin, that this is the third thing, Kremlin says it will reject any Western troops deployed on Ukrainian soil. That's a huge problem, because in order to provide some sort of security guarantee, America or Europe, some of the NATO countries, are going to have to be able to place weapons, to place manpower on the borders that are agreed upon in order to hold them steady and to keep Russia back. And Putin has kind of wiggled on that a bit, although he hasn't been clear as to exactly what he's willing to negotiate there, but we'll discuss that in a bit. So I'll go ahead and rename those. Those are the non-starters. Ceasefire can't be implemented until an agreement is reached. Ukraine cannot join NATO. And Western troops cannot be deployed on Ukrainian soil. Now, here's the asks from Russia. Russia wants freedom for the Russian Orthodox Church to operate in Ukraine, the official status for the Russian language in Ukraine, a partial lifting of sanctions against Russia, and Ukraine to formally recognize Russian sovereignty over Crimea. Here's where shit gets really problematic. Although this isn't exactly confirmed in the way that I would feel safe with saying 100% this is what's happening, in a way that has historically been accurate between the Vatican and the Papal States, even between the Vatican and Axis forces during World War II. And I'm sure the Russian Orthodox Church has plenty of this history itself. One of the ways that empires often push their political objectives is through religion, through sermons where they have their churches uphold certain ideas that empire finds agreeable. Then you have the official status for the Russian language in Ukraine. Why would Russia want Russian to be the official language of Ukraine? Well, because it's much easier to spread Russian propaganda if you have official status for that language. If you can't ban the language to be spoken in the region, obviously it's far easier for the Russian government to infiltrate the minds of its neighbor if they're speaking the same language. And And now, the next part really wasn't that disagreeable. A partial lifting of sanctions against Russia, that's to be expected if the ceasefire is to be reached. And then the last one's a big one. Ukraine to formally recognize Russian sovereignty over Crimea. You could argue, you could make a very compelling argument, aside from the NATO argument, that, well, really, it goes alongside with the NATO argument, which is to say that Russia has to have control over, at least to some degree, over the Crimean Peninsula, because the Crimean Peninsula is the only warm water port that Russia has for shipping. It goes straight into the, I believe, I want to say, the Caspian Sea, into the Black Sea, and then it leads into the Mediterranean. I don't believe I got the Caspian Sea correct there. Here, in fact, let's just go ahead and give myself a refresher. We'll pull up Google Earth real quick. Just so we can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about here, and just so I can not hate myself for not knowing every body of water on the globe. Okay, so I'm sorry, it's taking forever to load. Right here, where my mouse is, this is Crimea. This is the Crimean Peninsula, right here. And this body of water has a name, and I wish it would pull up because the Sea of Azov, there we go. I think I said the Caspian Sea like a fucking idiot. The Sea of Azov. This is Russia here. This is Ukraine here. This is Crimea here. What is technically still Ukrainian territory, but is soon to be Russian territory. You got Donetsk here, Luhansk. Anyway, this shipping port here, if you look at Russia as a whole, all of Russia's seaport access, for the most part, is in the north, which is where the North Pole is. Now, some of it, of course, can come off of its west or its eastern side, but you have to deal with other superpowers like China, like Japan, in those shipping regions. One of the regions it didn't have a lot of contest in was this former Crimean Peninsula region, and they didn't have to have icebreaker ships in the north to transport the cargo that they want to ship out of the country. So they have to have this access here that goes from the Sea of Azov into the Black Sea through, Istanbul, former Constantinople, and the passage here into the Mediterranean, and then on into the rest of the world, because once you have access to the Mediterranean, you effectively have access to all of northern Egypt, all of Europe to go along with it, and the Emirati / Arab states. So, for Putin to ask for sovereignty over Crimea is a huge deal for Ukraine, because if you look at Ukraine here, that shrinks down where they are now able to ship from substantially. If they have total control over this area, they effectively just took 2/3 of their entire southern strip of seafront property where they were able to trade from by sea. So I'll shut up about that now. And then Russia's gives. This is what Russia was willing to offer up as sort of either a trade-off. Well, I mean, in war, damn near everything's a trade-off. But this is what Putin felt nice enough to offer up. Putin said that he would freeze the front in the, and I apologize, guys. I know the second one is Kherson. I can't remember how to pronounce Zafors. We'll just say Zafors. Putin proposed to freeze the front in the Zafors and Kherson in exchange for a Ukrainian withdrawal from Donetsk and Luhansk. That's according to Axios. Ukraine to regain control of areas of Sumy and Kharkiv. So that's sort of the part of the trade-off there. And then Putin open to Ukraine receiving specific security guarantees. And that's where it gets vague, because if you'll remember earlier, in the non-starters, the Kremlin said that they cannot join NATO and there cannot be any Western troops on Ukrainian soil. But in one of the gives, Putin said he was open to receiving specific security guarantees. We don't know exactly what that is, even though it's been proposed what that could look like. I'll explain why it's damn near impossible here in just a minute. And then the Trump-Zelensky meeting. This is sort of the takeaways from the Trump-Zelensky meeting. This is August 18th. This was on a Monday, so the Trump-Putin meeting was on a Friday, Trump-Zelensky on a Monday. The non-starters for Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky has refused to withdraw from the Donbass, Donetsk, and Luhansk in talks with Trump and European leaders, according to Reuters. That's a huge problem. Why is that a problem? Because Putin, in his gives, said that he would freeze Zafors in the Kherson region in exchange for Donetsk and Luhansk. Zelensky refuses to withdraw from that. In fact, he says it is a non-starter. They will not do it at all. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has also said to his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump that Kiev rejects a demand put forward by Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin to cede the still unoccupied areas of Donetsk Oblast to Russia in exchange for freezing the front in other region, according to Reuters. So, Zelensky's saying that he doesn't want to trade any territory. And then to top it all off, Zelensky says that the Ukrainian constitution does not allow a land exchange to be possible. So in other words, they cannot draw any concessions. They cannot divide up the land on any existing lines of where Russia has moved to, where Ukraine has been pushed back to. That is a non-starter for Ukraine, and that's a problem, because with that being a non-starter, an end of the war cannot be reached, period. And as for Ukraine's proposals, what they proposed could happen to end the war, we got nothing. Absolutely nothing. I went through days and days, and there was not jack shit of what Zelensky proposed could happen. There were a bunch of media reports stating that there were talks amongst high-ranking officials. We've heard absolutely nothing further on the subject. And so my takeaway from that is, if you can see, based on what I said, Russia's non-starters, their asks, their gives were, they had a pretty substantial list, a list which wasn't too hard to compile, of course, because they had already offered this up in 2022, but a list that should be agreeable. It's 90% the same offering that was up in 2022. An offering that Ukraine agreed to in 2022 until Boris Johnson's fat ass stepped in. But now, Ukraine has effectively outright rejected any ability to move forward based on the non-starters that have been given since the Trump-Zelensky meeting. And now, we're going to get into sort of the spicy shit. So, since August 16th, which I believe was the meeting day between, or no, okay, so the day after the Trump-Putin meeting, everything kicked off, right? And we have pages upon pages 4 frickin' pages, actually damn near 4.5, of exactly what has happened since then. And I need a drink because I'm going to be doing a lot of talking here in a second. So, August 16th, this is a Saturday. This is exactly the day after the Trump-Putin meeting. U.S. President Donald Trump told Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and NATO leaders during a virtual call that Russian President Vladimir Putin is not interested in a ceasefire but prefers a comprehensive agreement to end the war in Ukraine, a source familiar with the call told Axios. And I went ahead and added that in there. It really doesn't matter, and you'll see why in a minute, but I thought I'll go ahead and add that in there because it did happen. Directly after the Trump-Putin meeting, the EU and the UK came out. They gave a joint statement, and in that joint statement, they basically said exactly how they felt about what was being discussed. They said that the UK and the EU refuse to stop arms supplies to Ukraine even after an agreement. They declared that they will continue to integrate Ukraine into the EU and NATO. They declared no limitations should be placed on Ukraine's armed forces or in its cooperation with third countries, and the United Kingdom declared it is ready to deploy troops to Ukraine a week after a ceasefire. So in other words, even if a peace agreement is reached by the United States and Russia, we'll even say Zelensky included, Europe will completely jeopardize that by continuing to supply arms to Ukraine, arms which they will take because they will need them. And the UK wants to deploy troops to Ukraine, even though Putin said that he doesn't want Western boots on the ground in Ukraine. And again, he was potentially open to changing that, but he hasn't been clear on exactly what that would look like. They also said that they wanted to continue to integrate the Ukraine into the EU and NATO. That is a non-starter for Russia. That cannot happen. Russia will not negotiate whatsoever with that being on the table. And if the U.S. is going to... And now, look, it could be the case that Trump steps in and says, fuck it. We're going to flop our big dick on the table and say, this is what's going to happen. Sit down at the next NATO summit and say, Ukraine will not join because we are effectively the arms supplier for NATO. We are the backing force that NATO would not exist without us. Ukraine cannot join NATO, will not join NATO, and you're going to have to back down on that. If that were to happen, this could move along nicely. But we'll really have to see if Trump has the ability to bully his way around those types of groups that he once acted like he was so high and mighty above. Those groups that he once acted like he could walk all over. We'll have to see if he still has it in him to tell them to go F themselves and say they simply cannot join NATO. After this joint statement, European officials and Trump discussed possible Article 5 style security guarantees for Ukraine outside NATO as part of a potential peace deal. British PM Keir Starmer has approved the use of Royal Air Force fighters to assist allies in patrolling the skies over Ukraine to ensure compliance with the ceasefire by Russia. Okay, the second one there, that's not so big of a deal. For the Royal Air Force to assist them in compliance, what they mean is air assistance, not having boots on the ground, that's potentially acceptable. Where we run into issues is with the quote-unquote possible Article 5 style security guarantees for Ukraine. There's absolutely no discussion as to what that would look like, if it would just be the United States guaranteeing Ukraine's safety, if it would just be Europe guaranteeing Ukraine's safety. But all that really is, at the end of the day, is a cover-up for a NATO-like entity that Russia doesn't want to accept. And furthermore, I don't know that I added it into this document here. Europe has, the EU has recently stated that they will not enter a security guarantee without the United States backing. So in other words, unless the United States backs it itself, a deal which Russia surely will not accept, there can be no Article 5 style guarantee. Trump then told European leaders peace could come quickly if Zelensky ceded all of the Donbass region, which he has said is a non-starter and he absolutely will not do, including areas not under Russian control, which there's no way in hell he'll do that because he doesn't want to see the areas that are in Russian control. Plus, he's open to U.S. security guarantees in Ukraine, and that Putin had accepted that peace would need to include Western troops here, according to the Wall Street Journal. Again, nobody knows what that looks like as of now. August 17th. We are now one day away from the Trump-Zelensky meeting. This is Sunday. The Russian FSB, which is one of their intel sources, announced that it thwarted a Ukrainian drone assault targeting the Smolensk nuclear power plant. Secretary Rubio said, "We may very well reach a point where everyone concludes no peace is going to happen here. We're going to have to do more sanctions, but when you do that, you're basically walking away from any prospect of a negotiated settlement." So what Rubio basically just said there is what I've been saying, which is to say, there will be no peace here. This war will continue. In fact, let's go ahead and watch that video. This is going to be kind of a long stream, but we'll go ahead and watch it anyway, because I know I get a little boring sitting here relatively monotone.
Lines. The deadline is as soon as possible. We want this war to end as soon as possible. I mean, that's why we're working on it. In terms of sanctions, look, at the end of the day, if we can't reach a peace agreement here and this war continues and so forth, then I anticipate you'll see the president take further action. He's already made that clear. The problem is this. Let's use our heads here. The problem is this. The minute you levy additional sanctions, strong additional sanctions, the talking stops. Talking stops. And at that point, the war just continues. You've probably just added 6, 8, 9, 12 more months to the war, if not longer. More people dead, more people killed, more people maimed, more families destroyed. Okay, that's what happens if you do that. Now, we may end up being at a point where we have to do that, where there is no other recourse, and that's the end. By the way, there already are sanctions on Russia. The president hasn't lifted any sanctions on Russia. They're already facing sanctions, severe sanctions, and they're facing them from the Europeans as well. So we may very well reach a point where everyone concludes no peace is going to happen here. We're going to have to do more sanctions. But when you do that, you are basically walking.
Doesn't Rubio look like a puppet? Like somebody's like, they just got their hand up his ass. They're just working his mouth. Every he moves his lips, he looks like a puppet, which, I mean, it's fitting because that is what he is. He's a puppet for his lobbyists.
Away from any prospect of a negotiated settlement here, which is what everyone is asking us to do. Everyone, including the Ukrainians and all the countries of Europe, are begging the United States to be engage Putin, and try to get him to agree to a peace agreement. They're all asking us to do that. They all are. And the minute you levy new sanctions, those talks probably stop for the foreseeable future, and that means the war continues for the foreseeable future. I hope that doesn't happen. We may very well wind up there, but we're going to try to do everything to prevent it because we want to reach a peace agreement.
I don't think that they are willing to do hardly anything to prevent it because I don't think that they have it within their ability to do so. So anyway, that's that. Following Rubio's statements, there was an interview. I'm just going to pull this up. There was an interview between Witkoff and a Fox Sunday News host. I'll just go ahead and play this here instead of reading it for you. Sorry, my internet's a little slow. It's probably because of the live stream. See if we can't refresh that.
What does that mean in practicality? What is the U.S. willing to commit to that effort to give Ukraine the assurances it needs to come to the table?
It means that the United States is potentially prepared to be able to give Article 5 security guarantees, but not from NATO, directly from the United States and other European countries. That is big. I mean, really big.
It's really big, except it's effectively impossible, and once again, there's absolutely no specifics here as to what that looks like, because he knows he can't give them because it's impossible.
Does it mean boots on the ground? What does it mean, but logistically?
I think part of the discussion that we're going to have on Monday throughout the day, because there's going to be breakout sessions there, is exactly the specifics of what the Ukrainians feel that they need. Because remember, as mediators, we were at this summit to advance the Ukrainian position, and we did that. And we did it successfully. Now it's for us to drill down on the granular details of exactly what the Ukrainians need to give them a sense of security in the future, and, by the way, what the Europeans need as well.
And I just provided that because, again, just to recap what was said there. She asked, what does a security guarantee mean in practicality? Witkoff, who is, I believe, the foreign envoy to the Middle East, he said, it means the U.S. is potentially prepared to be able to give Article 5 security guarantees, but not from NATO. She says, does it mean boots on the ground? He says, I think part of the discussion we're going to have Monday is exactly the specifics of what Ukrainians feel they need. So it's just a scapegoat to say that there's absolutely nothing there. And the reason, overall, is because the entire Trump-Putin summit was a PR stunt, because, and again, this has been just weeks of this adding up, so pardon me if I don't get every single piece of information here. But I just lost my train of thought. Just a second. Where was I going with that? Oh, the Trump-Putin summit being a PR stunt. So up until the point that they had declared that summit was going to happen, what had led up to that was Russia crippling Ukrainian front lines day after day. There were weeks and weeks of intel reports coming out stating that Russia was pushing further and further west in the regions that they currently control, and that the Ukrainian front line was effectively on the brink of collapse. Russia is holding all the cards there, and they're producing weapons left and right. The entire Russian economy at this point in time, everybody likes to say, it's effectively a gas station with an army. And to a degree, that has some truth. It's mostly bullshit. But at this point, it's now more of a war machine than it is a oil station. So, leading up to the peace talks, Trump had said weeks out from these talks happening that if Putin did not withdraw, did not issue a ceasefire by a certain deadline, that he was going to start providing Ukraine with ATACMS and I believe Tomahawks that were capable of reaching the interior of Russia from Ukrainian strongpoints. Then Trump backed down on that and said that instead what he was going to do was start tariffing start tariffing countries that were buying Russian oil. And we'll touch more on that here in just a minute. Then Trump realized that even in that department he was overplaying his hand, because he had already imposed sanctions on China and India for buying Russian oil, and it was creating a lot of instability between, I mean, we diverted all of this manufacturing that was happening in China to India, and now the two countries that we rely on for basically all of our manufacturing are tied up being sanctioned to death for buying Russian oil. So there's not a ton of leverage there, because we have to have both of those countries, at least for the moment, for our manufacturing needs. Still on August 17th, so Sunday, Trump then reposted on Truth Social. This was somebody else had posted something on Truth. He reposted it. It was a quote saying, "Ukraine must be willing to lose some territory to Russia. Otherwise, the longer the war goes on, they will keep losing even more land." So that's Trump there trying to really nudge Zelensky over Truth Social, saying, you're going to have to give up this land whether you want to or not. Zelensky, following that, then addressed Brussels, stating and reiterating, quote, "Ukraine will not withdraw from Donetsk, and if Putin refuses the Trump-Zelensky-Putin meeting, sanctions must be placed on Russia." So again, Ukraine will not withdraw from Donetsk. That's an ask of Russia's. They will not agree to that ask. And then another ask was that sanctions will be lifted. Zelensky is saying to put more sanctions on Russia. Then Ukraine escalated even further, and Ukraine announced that it had created its own long-range missile called the Flamingo, which can reach a distance of 3,000 kilometers. And while there's still not a ton of news as to how many of these they have, how effective they are, that will be a problem in the war to come if it continues to escalate, because that will be able to reach strategic positions that the Russians have created in their own borders and within Ukrainian borders very effectively. If what they are claiming is true, and if it has all of the correct internals, which are probably provided by the Americans, and by internals, I mean all of the computing power inside of the missile and via satellites, which I'm sure are American satellites feeding the missile the data it needs to get to where it needs to go. Assuming all of that came together correctly, that will be an issue. But again, we don't even know how many of them they have. We don't know what the production on it looks like. We don't know how well equipped the facilities are to produce such a weapon. So, but that was a pretty big update from Ukraine. Still on Sunday, August the 17th, 13 Russian drones were then 13 Russian drones then targeted Nova Pochta Terminal and the Azerbaijani energy giant Sokar operated gas station in Odessa, southwest Ukraine. U.S. President Donald Trump said that Ukraine will not get Crimea back, and no NATO for Ukraine. So again, nobody's on the same page as of this far, because Ukraine doesn't want to give up Crimea. Russia says it has to have Crimea. And the U.S. says that Ukraine will not get Crimea. August the 18th. This is when the Trump-Zelensky meeting happened at the White House. And this is when shit hit the fan. Quote, "NATO wants to protect Ukraine, and we will help them out with that." From President Trump. Mind you, sorry, just a second. Mind you that 6 hours before Trump said this, Trump said that, I'm sorry, guys. I had set this up thinking that Trump had conflicted himself between those 2 points, but at least as of this point in my paper here that was not the case. I thought Trump had contradicted himself on the NATO point. So we'll move on. Among the various pressure mechanisms the U.S. could apply against Ukraine, and this is opinion from the Wall Street Journal. This is something that they had posted basically just to give their thoughts on what America could do to pressure Ukraine. Among the various pressure mechanisms the U.S. could apply against Ukraine to encourage Kiev to agree to a potentially disadvantageous deal is intelligence sharing. So, without American satellites, without Starlink, the Ukrainian military would be defeated effectively tomorrow. They have to have the ability to surveil with those American-controlled satellites, not only to use them to surveil and to track troop movements, they also need them to do what I had just mentioned a minute ago, which is with these new Ukrainian missiles. They have to have satellites to direct missiles, to direct certain types of drones, etc. And if that intelligence sharing is to stop and they are no longer gathering that data or no longer sharing that data, that's a huge, for lack of a better term, trump card that could be played in terms of trying to pressure Ukraine into agreeing to what Russia would see fit to allow a deal to take place. Prior to private discussions in the Oval Office, Trump and Zelensky, this is what this was. This was just a map to sort of outline the current Russian positions in Ukraine. And I had this marked because I thought that this is a pretty good overview just to get a good understanding of what it looks like here. I'll zoom in. So, this is Russia all along the eastern border here. Russia currently has 99% control of Luhansk, 76% control of Donetsk, both of which Zelensky refuses to give control over. 73% of Zaporizhia, 73% of Kherson, and Crimea, while they do not have data on what percentage they have taken over in that region, you can go ahead and assume that they've effectively taken it over 100%. In fact, that is what I will say because there's no percentage here and none here. So we can assume Crimea has 100% been taken over by Russia. And now, leading up to all of this blowing up, here comes the missile, here comes the nuke, here comes the 5D chess that Trump loves to play, even though anybody who's paying any attention at all knows that this was not 5D chess at all. This was just a fucking shell game. Quote, during the Trump-Zelensky talks, a massive post-war $150 billion defense deal was agreed upon. Ukraine will purchase $100 billion in U.S. weapons and a $50 billion drone deal, according to the Financial Times. The deal will be funded by Europe. So at the end of all this, after the Zelensky talks, after what was supposed to be a trilateral meeting following the Alaska summit between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, what was supposed to be a furthering in the discussions of settling the war, of ending the war, Trump goes ahead and gives them $150 billion worth of equipment. This is after giving them $1.5 billion just a few days earlier. Could we get $100 billion to, I don't know, help develop infrastructure in America? No. Ukraine gets another $150 billion during peace talks that Trump has said that he is trying to push forward. He still really hasn't, unless within the last few hours this has changed, has still really not changed his position on this either. Although he did put it up for grabs to some extent. He was rather vague, but we'll get there in a second. At least rather vague on whether or not he was going to act upon furthering the war. And following this, as you can imagine, following the United States saying, we're going to fund you for another year and a half with $150 billion, escalation immediately broke out. So this is still the 18th. This is Monday. Russian ballistics impacted against. I'm sorry, guys. Some of these names I can't do. Dobroslav, Odessa region, southwest Ukraine. Russia launched 270 drones and 10 missiles overnight. Russian drone strikes hit oil refinery in Poltava Oblast. Ukraine then amped it up even further. Ukrainian drone strikes Russian fuel train near Zaporozhye. Ukrainian troops attempted to breach the international border and break into the Bryansk region of Russia. So Ukraine, we'll go back to this map here again. Ukraine tried to break through into Russian territory. Russian territory that's currently not under contest. The Uneka oil pumping station in Russia's Bryansk region, a key hub of the Druzhba oil pipeline, was targeted again by the 14th Regiment of Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces this evening. August 19th, this is Tuesday. President Trump says France, Germany, and the UK want boots on the ground as part of security guarantee for Ukraine, and no U.S. troops will be deployed on the ground in Ukraine, noting that potential U.S. security guarantees could be provided from the air. So Trump there is sort of floating that same idea that was floated earlier by the UK, that they would provide air support via the Royal Air Force. Trump's sort of touting a similar idea. Axios stated that Putin asked China to serve as guarantor for an agreement with the U.S. and European nations, which is somewhat interesting because, again, if this is going to move forward in any meaningful manner, and there's only really a few pathways that could take at this point, and I might discuss those at the end of this, to bring China in as a guarantor, somebody who is a major trading partner with both countries, could definitely help, at least to a degree, guarantee that what we agree upon is actually taken seriously. But again, they haven't really expanded on what that would look like. Politico said that Europe doubts Trump's peace talks will succeed and instead plans to test Putin's resolve. So Europe trying to aggress there. And then, quote, about 10 European countries are ready to send deterrent forces to Ukraine post-war. And that doesn't necessarily tie into the idea that Europe would continue the war following a ceasefire, but that's 10 European countries saying that they're ready to send troops there to hold the borders that are agreed upon, borders which have not and will not be agreed upon, and troops which, again, Russia really has not agreed as being okay with having in the region. August 20th, this is now Wednesday, I believe. The EU foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, said the bloc won't trust any deals with Russia and will keep sanctions while boosting Ukraine's defense. She added, security guarantees aim to prevent Russia from regrouping. Germany then said that they cannot send troops to Ukraine due to a soldier shortage, says SPD Deputy Andreas Schwartz, which contradicted Trump's claim that Germany and France are eager to deploy. The FBI warned that Russian FSB hackers Berserk Bear and Dragonfly are exploiting Cisco and SNWP flaws to target global networks and critical infrastructure, including in the United States. So while this is all going on, while Russia and Ukraine are fighting overseas, back home here, the FBI is warning that Russia, via their hackers, have infiltrated some pretty serious infrastructure in the United States and elsewhere. Russia continued to retaliate following Ukraine's aggression, which was a response to Russian aggression. Russia again retaliated, banning 21 Britons, including journalists and NGO members, from entry following UK's sanctions targeting its 100 entities. Hacked Ukrainian database then revealed that Kiev had suffered 1.7 million casualties since the beginning of the war. And this is a point that I've made before, but I'm going to say it again. If you look right now with China, although China is claiming that they will not invade Taiwan while Trump is president. Sorry, guy, that light went out on me again. Give me 2 seconds. I'll pick right back up here, I promise. 2 seconds. Okay. Fucking light keeps going out on me. I can't get it to stay on. And the lighting looks terrible anyway. Like, look at how red my face is. I look crazy. I look like I've been smacked around or something. Anyway. Late show, not a lot of time went into setting it up today, so I'm a little unhinged, but anyway, we'll get back to it. So, pardon me there. So again, the hack database revealed that Kiev had suffered 1.7 million casualties since the beginning of the war, and I guess I'll just start with this. We're in World War III right now, whether we realize it or not. More people have died. In fact, I think the number is reaching almost double at this point. More people have died in Ukraine so far than died in all of Europe in World War II up until the time that America joined the fight. So from 1939 until 1942, I believe, that full 3-year period, 2.5 maybe, where all of Europe is engulfed in war. And I believe, I don't know exactly, I want to say there was about 10 or 11 countries in total which were engulfed in war at the time. All of those European countries in that 2.5 to 3 year span only suffered about half of the total casualties that have been suffered thus far in Ukraine. So, to my point, whether or not we realize it, we are currently in or leading up to World War III. And to further my point, I'll probably touch on this later in the week. I say later in the week, there's only 2 days left. I'll probably touch on this on Sunday. I might do a Sunday show and kind of touch up on this a little bit, because I have quite a bit regarding the current Middle Eastern situation. As of right now, Syria is effectively in a civil war between the Druze separatists and the SDF. Libya is currently in a civil war between Hezbollah, its supporting factions, and the Lebanese government. Iraq is currently in a civil war, or at least they're stating that they are in the beginnings of a civil war within the last 24 hours. Iran is about to reach the end of the EU JCPOA agreements at the end of this month. When that happens, snapback sanctions could hit, and when that happens, the Israel-Iran conflict could kick off, and Israel and Iran are both rearming as we speak, even while Iran continues to get crippled by the drought it's suffering, etc., etc. China is currently in the Strait of Taiwan conducting military exercises, and they're claiming that they will not invade while Trump is president. But if all of this kicks off at one time, the U.S. really ramps up its position in the Ukrainian war, maybe we even deploy troops, maybe NATO deploys troops, all of these Middle Eastern countries are up in civil wars. Israel is fighting a massive war with Iran, which we have to back. China might just go ahead and take it. And when they do, if that's not World War III, then what the fuck is? You know, and it's easy to think that we're not in it now because unlike World War I and World War II, we're so technologically advanced in our day-to-day life, whether it be agriculture, whether it be technology, that we use cell phones, computers, whether it's all the investment that's happened in this country over the last 100 years that still really props up our day-to-day life. We don't feel the effects in the same way that they did in World War I and World War II. They knew that they were in a war then, especially with the economy. Part of this deindustrialization that the United States has done, going alongside our technological advancement, offshoring our manufacturing to these other countries, although a lot of it's not defense related. Some of it is, not a lot of it. But a lot of our defense manufacturing is happening within the United States. But the technological advancements there, whether it's robots that are aiding the, what am I trying to say here? The manufacturing lines and taking jobs that would have been there before as the war ramps up, whether it's AI taking certain less hands-on roles that ordinary people would have taken on as this ramps up. A lot of those hirings that we would have seen in the past, as this goes on, we're not seeing. And so the public's really, you know, if we are in the middle of it, I don't think we would know until we outright have our own troops deployed, perhaps. And that may very well soon happen. Following that leak of 1.7 million casualties in Ukraine, Russian strategic communication lines were activated, indicating a large-scale Russian missile attack against Ukraine is likely, and that was according to Rerum Novarum. President Donald Trump then insinuated on social media that he's open to Ukraine launching more attacks on Russia as the White House looks to pressure Russian President Vladimir Putin to agree to a one-on-one meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump met Zelensky and European leaders at the White House on Monday. After that meeting, he directed administration officials to work with Russia and Ukraine to set up a meeting between the two leaders, followed by a summit that he would join. The Kremlin so far has proved non-committal, and no date or location for the summit has been set. Trump also asked U.S. and European officials to work together on a package of security guarantees to entice Kiev to agree to a deal that he said would involve territorial exchanges, according to Bloomberg. According to Lavrov, who I believe is the Russian defense minister, pardon me if I got that wrong, but he's very high up in the Russian government, he said, quote, "We support the principles and security guarantees that were agreed in April 2022, sort of reiterating what I had mentioned earlier, that the proposal put forward by Russia again, which really, whether or not Ukraine and America, when it comes to grips with it, was very, it's the best they're going to get. So, unless the U.S. continues to commit, and again, based on what I just read directly before that, quote, President Donald Trump insinuated in a social media post that he's open to Ukraine launching more attacks on Russia. And we just gave him $150 billion. And we, to some degree, just allowed them to stall for a week and a half until the aggression broke out again post Zelensky and Trump meeting on Monday. The war continues. In terms of the trilateral summit, I had a little section here in my notes because I was hoping that maybe there would be some information on that before I really started looking into the whole situation. Putin told Trump that he's ready to meet with Zelensky, and Putin offered to meet Zelensky in Moscow, which was rejected by both Zelensky and Trump. And then this is sort of my last part here. I don't know how long. How long have I been going for? Let's see. I guess I'm not really too sure. I feel like I've been going on for quite a while. So, yeah, I've been going on for an hour. So, I don't know. I don't have a lot to reiterate. If something sparks my mind here in a second, maybe I'll sort of jump back into it. But earlier I was talking about how roughly 2 weeks ago, Trump was threatening to implement further sanctions on India and China for buying Russian oil. And just sort of at the end of my notes here, I had a little timeline of what has transgressed there since then. On August 14th, Modi, who is I believe the Prime Minister of India, his latest move is to resume direct flights with China as soon as next month. So in that, Modi is planning on going to meet with likely Xi, although it could be somebody else, because the last time that Modi met with a Chinese official, it was an ambassador. So maybe not Xi himself, but Modi is looking to resume direct flights with China. So that sort of reflects this opposition that India is having now with the United States. On August 16th, New Delhi, quote, hopes for the lifting of U.S. secondary sanctions on India after the Putin-Trump meeting. On August 18th, U.S. cancels scheduled trade talks with India amid escalating tariff tensions. So in other words, right after New Delhi said that they had hoped to lift sanctions, and they kind of opposed that that positioning with what they did directly before that, with resuming the direct flights with China. I'm sorry, I keep grabbing at my nose here. It's so itchy. I don't know why. I don't know if I need a humidifier in here or what, but man. But the U.S. canceled the scheduled trade talks with India amid escalating tariff tensions. So even though New Delhi said it had hoped for the lifting of sanctions, they didn't really position themselves as if that's what they were aiming towards, and Trump outright canceled any negotiations in response to the tariff tensions. And then on August 20th, the Russian embassy in India had declared a 5% price reduction on Russian crude oil for India. So not only is India buddying up further with China, they're also buddying up further with Russia. And if you know anything about India, this isn't surprising. This is what India does. This is how India operates. They're pretty, non-polar. I guess you could say bipolar. They play both cards, and for the time being, it works out well for them. So I guess that's really all I got. I've been going on for an hour. I'm sure I had more there, but it's been a long day. I gave you a lot of sort of my own interdictions as I was going through that, so I think I've kind of stressed my limit on how much free thought I have for today. So I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, later on in the week, I'll probably get into, and by later on in the week, I mean Sunday, I'll be getting into some of the Middle Eastern conflict that is breaking out, and really looking more towards Iran, because the majority of the story, there's a lot going on in Syria, there's a bit going on in Lebanon, and the bulk of that story is in Iran. And for the next couple weeks, that's probably, even with this Ukrainian thing going on, even with the Ukrainian war progressing, within the next week or two, Iran is going to be front and center of the news sources. So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you liked my analysis. And we'll be doing some more deep dives as soon as possible. So this has been GeoIntel. I'm Cody Jordan. Thanks for watching this. Thanks for hanging in there, and have a good night, everyone.